Hello there again, my fellow film buffs. This is Straight Shooter, and welcome to episode 6 of How I See It. Now, here I am again at Team Sound Studios. It looks like I'm going to be here doing this for the long haul, meaning this is going to be my shooting home, so I want to take this opportunity to give my sincere thanks to my good buddy and bandmate for providing the location, helping with lighting, set design, and agreeing to have me do this long term here. So I will be putting a link in the description to the contact for the studio. So if you have a band or if you have something that you want to shoot, video, or whatever it is, and you're in the San Fernando Valley in California, or if it's convenient for you, please give them a shout. Anyway, so today, as you can tell by the title, as always, I'm here to talk about the new SpiderMan movie. Now, it's been a little bit since I've done a movie review, about 3 weeks if you're counting. But unfortunately, I don't always get to see movies right away like I would like, opening weekend. But I am going to be more mindful about putting in an effort to see movies sooner so that I can do more reviews. I'm here to talk about Spider-Man Into the SpiderVerse. I finally got to see this movie. I was so excited about it. As you probably know, it's an animated movie. It's not connected to the current Avengers universe, aka the MCU. It's its own separate storyline, and it's about Miles Morales, who, if you know from the comics, is the new version of Spider-Man, and he's half African American, half Latino, and in the movie, he's dealing with a lot of things like getting bit by an unusual spider, and then he gets to meet his hero, the original Spider-Man, Peter Parker, and also dealing with a lot of things that teens deal with, like issues at school, hormones, trying to get girls to notice him, struggle, schoolwork, and family issues at the same time. He gets in the middle of a heated battle between Spider-Man and the bad guys, and there's a whole dimensional portal that opens up, and the universe is thrown into a little bit of chaos. He gets to meet the original Spider-Man and other versions of Spider-Man. It's an interesting story. Let me start out by going into the animation itself. It looks a little bit different. It definitely has a very different feel than any other Spider-Man animated cartoon, which is a good thing because you didn't want for it to look too much like the old Spider-Man, like from the 60s, or the Spider-Man animated series from the 90s, or the Spectacular Spider-Man, which I'm not saying anything bad about any of those series, but I'm just saying you want it to be its own thing, which it definitely pulls off. But you do want to stay after the credits because there is a really cool and entertaining throwback to the old 60s animated Spider-Man. There's only a couple problems I had with the animation itself. One of the things was the drawings of the characters, which the edges were sometimes a little bit doubled, where sometimes I thought I could see two of the edge. I don't know, it looked a little bit weird in some parts, but it wasn't prevalent throughout the whole movie. That's like a subtle thing. Maybe it was where I was sitting, who knows. But there was one thing in the movie that was a big head-scratcher for me, and that's how they designed Kingpin. Yes, Wilson Fisk does show up in this movie, and he is pulling the strings as a big bad. They designed him like he's just a giant wall with a round head. And that's pretty much what the Kingpin looked like. Outside of that, most of the character designs were pretty spot on. The characters themselves, including Kingpin, the way they sounded, the way they acted, were pretty spot on. So it's not that big of an issue. It just kind of made me say, well, that's kind of funny how Kingpin looks. Anyway, so besides that, the action was really good. It was really cool to see the way they did the animation as far as the fight scenes, the way they web swing. But overall, I thought it was very beautifully animated. It was definitely a visual treat. The other thing that was cool about the movie that was also, some of it wasn't very cool, was there were different versions of Spider-Man. Like, you had Peter Parker, which, as we found out, was the Raimi universe version of Peter Parker, because they called back to him stopping the train, doing the upside-down kiss with Mary Jane, and him doing the stupid dance thing in the streets. It was cool that they called back to that version, because you don't see that very often these days. If you guys play PS4, if you have the Spider-Man game, you see just about every costume called back to, I think, except for the Raimi Spider-Man, unless they released it as DLC, who knows. And then you had different universes, versions of Spider-Man. Like, you had this noir Spider-Man. He looked like a detective with a hat and a trench coat, and he talked really cool, almost like he was Wolverine. He was definitely the coolest Spider-Man in the movie. And then there was Spider-Gwen, who is, of course, Gwen Stacy, who got pulled from another universe, and is Spider-Woman in that universe. And so she comes into the universe where Miles Morales is. Then you had this Spider-Pig, which I don't know if he's called Spider-Pig. I think he's Peter Porker, but I think Spider-Pig because of the Simpsons reference. When I saw the trailers, I was like, really? A Spider-Pig? But he was actually not bad in the movie, and he has some really funny lines. And there's this one action scene where he does some really cool stuff. The one character version of Spider-Man that I was like, on was the one where there's this little girl who's definitely supposed to be like anime style with a robot, and she goes into the robot and controls it. And I didn't know what was up with that, but thankfully I saw the movie with my best friend, and he was like, oh yeah, my son plays Overwatch, and they totally ripped that character out of Overwatch. And I'm like, really? I don't really play Overwatch. But besides that, I mean, the movie was really cool because the way that they come together, and there's a lot of comedy, there's a lot of action, and there's a lot of diversity in the characters. When I say that, I don't mean just like people of color or whatever. What I mean by diversity is that you have the noir Spider-Man, you have the Peter Porker Spider-Man, you have Spider-Gwen, then you have the robot, and there's a lot of different facets of personalities of Spider-Man. And then you have Miles Morales. And it's really cool to see all of those in one movie. Because usually Spider-Man movies have one Spider-Man, Peter Parker. I mean, that's the formula. It works, especially if the MCU version of Spider-Man is so awesome. But in any case, I think at the end of the day, the decisions they made for the movie, some were really good, some were not so good, but none of it took away from the enjoyment of the movie. And they took a little bit different takes, like there's a female version of Doc Ock, and then there's Scorpion, who actually looks kind of like a scorpion, like a mutate between a human and a scorpion, which is pretty cool. And then there's this other guy who is stalking the superheroes, and we find out that he's Miles Morales' uncle. He was a really cool villain because he was like an In the Shadows guy, and he had this really cool, like, robotic metal hand. Thankfully, they didn't just rely on the Kingpin to do all the ha-ha bad guy stuff. There were other villains that were really cool. Like, at first I was apprehensive about a female Doc Ock, but she actually ended up being really cool and a little bit different from the other Doc Ocks that we've seen before. And it worked. It really worked. And even Kingpin, even though he looked kind of odd, his character worked because he was so ruthless. And that's what Kingpin is. He's ruthless. He don't give a you know what. He wants to destroy Spider-Man. He wants to destroy all the Spider-Mans. He is trying to get to the dimension where his wife and child are alive. And he doesn't care who gets destroyed in the process. And he'll destroy anyone that gets in his way. Which, in a way, kind of makes him a little bit sympathetic, because when you have a tragedy, that is something to get behind. But goodness was just lost in him. He was just too evil, too ruthless, and too willing to step on anyone. But he was also really cool. I think if they made the Wilson Fisk of the 90s Spider-Man the Animated Series with the personality of the Into the Spider-Verse Wilson Fisk, I think would have worked really well. Because Wilson Fisk isn't supposed to be very sympathetic. Outside of the Daredevil universe. I mean, Wilson Fisk in the Daredevil, I mean, it's Vincent D'Onofrio. He's awesome. But I think when it comes to animation, I think a ruthless Kingpin that's not sympathetic just works really well. Because it's a cartoon. I mean, it's supposed to be a little bit deep, but not too deep. Not like live action where it's all dramatic. And they really struck the balance between tones. The animation is joyful, but it's also a little bit dark. And that's where the different facets of Spider-Man's come out. Like the noir Spider-Man, he was a badass. The pig Spider-Man, he was for comic relief. Then you had the girl with the robot. I'll call her the Overwatch Spider-Man for now. It was different, and it was for anime fans, obviously. And then you had Spider-Gwen. And Spider-Gwen was really cool, I gotta say. And for an animated chick, she was pretty hot. And then you had Miles Morales. And it's easy to dismiss Miles Morales as being annoying, especially if you're not into the fact that he replaced Peter Parker. But the movie did it to where he didn't replace Peter Parker, because his universe's Peter Parker dies. The Peter Parker that mentors him is from a different dimension. But he has the memories of the Spider-Man that he knew. But he's just a bit older, he's a bit out of shape. But he's a little bit different because when he leaves that universe, Peter Parker's gone. So Miles Morales is Spider-Man because he has to be. Not because Peter Parker said, hey, I think I should give this a break or retire or something. Let's let some other person have it. Peter Parker's gone, Miles Morales is the guy, at least in his universe. And I think that works really well. Anyway, so with all the points that I've made, I like the movie a lot. I think I would give it a B+. Reason why I'm not going into A territory is a couple issues with the animation, and there was one of the Spider-Man characters that I was like, it was kind of shoehorned in there, but overall, I enjoyed the movie. I would recommend it. It's definitely a breath of fresh air in convoluted Spider-Man universes there are. Like you had the Raimi Spider-Man, then you had Amazing Spider-Man universe, now you have the MCU Spider-Man, and this movie lets you take a break from all that. And it gives you a lot of Easter eggs into just the Spider-Man universe without having to call back to Wolverine or the X-Men or Daredevil or whoever, because Spider-Man's universe in itself is vast enough. And I think that's probably why Sony is doing the whole Spider-Man universe on their own. Like they just did Venom, and there's more movies that are planned. But in any case, that's how I see it. I will see you guys again. Have fun at the movies.